I don't like doing my own home repairs, and when I made some videos that honestly show how much I don't like it, they seem to help a lot of other guys like me. So I thought it would be good to make this new set of videos. Guys like me have a million questions for the progressive activists that we see on the news, but nobody on TV ever asks those questions. On CNN, the host probably agrees with the activists, so his questions are weak. And on Fox News, the host just tries to make them look bad. Either way, nobody's asking the questions that might actually help us get a feel for where they're coming from, so we might actually understand them a little better. It's no surprise that people who disagree over politics are so angry at each other nowadays. So right before Christmas, me and my brother, who is himself progressive, we drove around the West and did our own interviews. We drove to 22 cities and interviewed dozens of people who support progressive causes to ask those questions that are never asked. We're not trying to change their mind or make them look bad. We just want to understand where they're coming from. These folks were brave, considering what can happen nowadays if you say one wrong thing on YouTube. And we talked about a lot of really sensitive subjects. So just leave right now if these conversations might offend you. If you stay though, I think you'll hear some things you've never heard before and have a better understanding of your fellow Americans. I did. In Ogden, we talked to Pam Harrison, a licensed clinical social worker and political activist who's passionate about the U.S. education system. We started by asking her about Donald Trump.
Well, he just seems so fraudulent to me.
Okay,
He's just an obnoxious rich person.
Oh, he's obnoxious for sure, yeah.
And when the what's that Hollywood tape came out?
Yeah, Access Hollywood tape
came out. That just makes me crazy. It makes me want to throw up.
Okay. Did you equally feel, revulsed by Bill Clinton for what he did to
Monica Lewinsky? Yes, absolutely.
I respect that. Thank you. I'm glad because, I mean, that's great. That's great that you're not selective about who you hate for these kinds of things, because we certainly didn't see that among feminists.
Well, I'm a feminist, and I was outraged about it.
You've explained well why you don't like Trump. I should just leave it at that, because I don't want to get into minutia. I would agree with you that.
Well, we could step into the politics of it. I mean, there's nothing that he's done since coming into office that isn't a total affront of my values. Okay. That I see everything that's dear to me being dismantled and destroyed and undermined.
Okay. Well, do you understand, from our perspective, those are the kinds of things that we saw first with Lyndon Johnson and then with Barack Obama. So it's not, there is this thing in America where when somebody wins, they get to do things the way their voters like. Mm-hmm. So it's almost as like you guys are like, hey, no, you can't do that. And we're like, well, yeah, we elected them to do that. So I'm sorry, you guys didn't win this time. I mean, it was President Obama himself said those elections have consequences. So are you willing to grant that he has a right to do what his voters want him to do?
Ooh, I think he's really pushing constitutional bounds and overreach.
Okay, well, and I don't want to argue, because again, we could argue for hours and hours about which administration does more extra constitutional things. But in your opinion, that he's doing things that go beyond the Constitution, that are not legal, that we shouldn't support, and they're just bad things. Okay. President Obama tried some things with, to do some things with executive orders that a lot of people said, well, let's see what the courts think about that. Were you equally apprehensive when he started doing things with a pen and a phone?
I'm trying to remember the executive orders.
So is there anything else, I guess, about the current administration? You mentioned Betsy DeVos. What are the objections you have to what she's trying to do at the Department of Education?
Well, as background, I come from an educational family. As I've watched charter schools weasel their way in, and I'm not entirely opposed to them, but I'm seeing that it's creating another divide where it's getting back to segregated schools by wealth or by race, and it's also putting out of reach some of the best resources, and it's defunding public schools in the end. I don't like vouchers.
The origin of charter schools was a reaction to the poor performance of the normal system, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I'm not entirely opposed to them, like I said, but I don't think that they're as accessible to any kid out there that might thrive in that particular kind of setting. And I really don't want to see the defunding of the public school system, which we are seeing. I'm just very, very protective of what we've always known as a public education system.
What do we do to fix the regular schools so the charter schools are no longer an inelegant solution to a problem that nobody can deny?
Well, underlying all of the demise of the public education system is funding and teacher pay. Teacher pay is pathetic.
Okay, well, every time I hear that, I come back to, okay, I went to parochial school. There's an awful lot less pay. They have a lot more students. They spend less per student. The education quality much, much better than public schools. Go to some countries where they spend far less on education. The outcomes are far greater because they are concentrating on things that we have chosen not to concentrate on.
Yes, and it's complicated because No Child Left Behind did no favors to teachers and to students. It's complicated. There's a lot of factors to it, but I think that we have to retain our talent, and in a tough economy, which has gotten tougher and tougher, if a person doesn't think that it's worth the aggravation, because being a public school teacher is a lot of stress.
Well, you said yourself, your whole family's been in education years and years. They've seen over the decades the change in public education. Isaac Asimov went to public high school and grade school, right? Brilliant. You couldn't beat a New York City public education 60 years ago. You wouldn't want to touch one nowadays, right? So, unless you're in a charter school, the solution to this problem that nobody can deny. So, your family's been there. What have they seen? Have they been happy with the changes in discipline, changes in uniforms, changes in curriculum? The books were changing. They started adding more pictures. They started making the stuff less demanding. They started saying rote memorization was silly. Any comment at all in your experience of what those changes have wrought with education?
Well, again, I can't speak for my relatives, but in my own observations, absolutely all of those are factors, and kind of losing the purpose. It's very complicated.
Oh, these issues are all complicated. One thing that always confuses me is, what do you think more money would do for teachers?
Again,
how would that improve education?
I think that it's been a butt of jokes and well known for as long as I've been alive that teachers are underpaid and underappreciated, and to elevate that profession, to show that that's one of the most important things that we can have in society, is someone that cares for the guidance and learning of our children and growing an educated populace. So I just, in general, that you compared the sports heroes to a teacher, I would like to see higher pay and higher status for the profession.
Okay, so there's other factors as well. What I hear from teachers is that, my daughter's a teacher, my son-in-law is a teacher, is that the bureaucratic, ridiculous. I mean, what is it? There used to be one bureaucrat for every 9 teachers back in the 50s. Now it's 9 bureaucrats for every 9 teachers. Pretty soon the bureaucrats will be, the people who are not in front of students will be greater than the number of teachers. I mean, in conservative circles, we're saying, look, before we start talking about throwing money at something, can we talk about the organizational structure here? Do you have any response to that?
Well, of course, that needs to be examined and it needs to be improved. And yeah, teachers do get their hands tied and they do get slapped for using their own gifts of creativity. And
so that would make me think you would be a natural ally of Betsy DeFoss. She's all about trying to get rid of the clutter, getting rid of the layers of bureaucrats in between the students and the teachers. No? You don't see it that way?
No, I really cannot see that in her at all. I see her as promoting charters over public. And her methods were not very successful in her own state. and yet she got this plum position in the administration. And I just see it as rewarding one of his rich donors. So it's worrisome to me. And bringing in Pruitt to the EPA, who is sued over and over and over. There's just all kinds of things that that just kind of stab me in the heart with every announcement of, oh, you've got to be kidding, that's who you're picking? That? So anyway, we could go on with a lot of those.
Okay. I think you and I actually agree on an awful lot of stuff. I think we may disagree on how we're trying to get there. But thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time.
All right.
Great. That ends this interview in our Drive to Understand series. Talking to Pam Harrison was a bit like looking into a mirror for me. She thinks of Donald Trump as fraudulent and really doesn't like his cabinet choices like Betsy DeVos and Scott Pruitt. And those are exactly the same thoughts I had about Barack Obama and folks like Eric Holder and Thomas Perez. When will we have one of these so-called honest conversations about race, immigration, or globalism? And I worry that the press and now social media seem to be in the business of shutting down the conversations instead of having them. I hope you may want to support this series by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks.